Right, I've just arrived at the cinema and I'm about to see Rise of Skywalker. Now, as a Star Wars fan, like many Star Wars fans, I've been a little bit disappointed with the first two of this trilogy, and this is supposed to tie up all the knots, finish off all the story. The point of a trilogy that's pre-planned is that you have a plot line that runs right the way through. And whether you're a Star Wars fan or you're not a Star Wars fan, I think it's clear to say that this trilogy has been made up as they go along, with 3 different directors, 3 different sets of writers. I think that, whether you're a Star Wars fan or not, is obvious looking at this trilogy compared with the previous 2 trilogies. Anyway, I'm going to do a spoiler-free first impressions after the cinema, and then I'll do a proper review of the trilogy later. So, first impressions, I've just come out of the cinema and kind of sad, because as promised it does bring the saga to an end. I suppose the problem for every Star Wars fan is we all had our own thoughts about where the story was going to go, and these last 3 films haven't been that story. I mean, Luke Skywalker turning into a coward who gave up. That's not Luke Skywalker. He was the eternal optimist. So I think I need to digest this and then give you some thoughts, taking on the whole 9 episodes, because one thing I can say, Rise of Skywalker was definitely the best of the last 3. I know that's not raising the bar very high, but it is. Anyway, I'll digest my thoughts and come back on this. So, let's put it all together. 9 films. The first 6 instigated, thought through, scripted to a large degree, and directed mostly, or from a distance at least, by George Lucas. It's clear that he had a story he wanted to tell, running right the way through. Apparently, he originally planned to tell 6 films, the story of Darth Vader, his rise to power and his turn to the dark side, and then his redemption. And that's the first 6 films. Now, as a kid, 1977, 78, saw the first film, special effects, characters. It blew my mind, as it did so many other people. It created a universe that geeks the world over could fall in love with. And we did. And those 3 films are the classics, okay? They had their flaws. But the rules were laid down. This is what the Jedi could do. This is what the Jedi couldn't do. You can't heal people. You can't do this. You can't do that. Then came the first 3. George Lucas telling the story that he originally intended to tell, which is the entire Darth Vader story. So those films got criticised for the amount of CGI, and I can see why, but I think that they're basically some of the casting. I mean, I think young Darth Vader, young Anakin, didn't work for me. But the other characters, I mean, you know, Obi-Wan, the other Jedi, nice work. And there was this, you know, it followed the rules, it followed a story. The last three. Now, what can I say? If you are going without any knowledge of Star Wars and you're just going to see an action film with a bit of sci-fi, the last three individually as films work. Okay, there's a lot of action. They are individually entertaining movies. That you can say of the Disney films. If you're not a Star Wars fan, you can enjoy those as films, and they are good. Okay? It's only if you take into account the previous story. When George Lucas was going to make a second trilogy, I wanted the Luke Skywalker story. I wanted to know what happened to those characters. I wasn't really interested in the young Darth Vader. I can understand why it was done, and I'm glad that it was done, because you understand how everything falls into place. But it wasn't the story I was desperate to see. So I really, really, really hoped bringing back the old cast and new characters would allow me to see that story. And the first film disappointed me. And I'll tell you why it disappointed me. Because when an empire falls apart, the Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire, Alexander the Great's empire, it factions off, okay? You get lots of warlords fighting, and you end up with several armies instead of one big army. And into that, the rebels would have become more powerful. So for them to suddenly back at square one, and suddenly this First Order to have popped up from nowhere, and Snoke, who the fuck was Snoke? That was basically my first thoughts when I saw him, and I never stopped thinking that. Who came up with him? What the hell was this? Kylo Ren. This is not a fault of the acting. The acting's not the problem, but he was more like a sulky teenager than someone trained in the Jedi arts, okay? For someone who was supposed to be all-powerful, he didn't have much control over his powers. And Rey, beautiful, brilliant, again, brilliant casting. You know, the heroine, I like the idea of a female heroine, brilliant. But to suddenly generate Jedi powers without any kind of training, nobody taking you to one side and say, look, this is what you've got here. It throws away everything that was in the first 6 movies. So the first movie, I was disappointed. As a spectacle, as a movie, great, fantastic. But the all-powerful First Order that had come from nowhere, there would have been several factions fighting, and you pick a side, and you're still looking for good against evil, and, you know, will good triumph? That's the story that would have happened at the end of an empire. It wasn't that story. It wasn't that logical. And for me, that grated. Okay? Second film. Oh, God, I'm with Mark Hamill on this. I mean, Luke Skywalker suddenly becoming a defeatist who wanted the Jedi to end, and then you create this villain called Snoke and kill him? Where does the story go from there? It's completely disjointed. It doesn't, you know, I'm not learning anything. I know that Rey's confused about her past. She's finally had some training. Wow, great. But all of a sudden, she's gone backwards instead of forwards. And Kylo Ren's still a sulky teenager. I'm not going to be able to, I'm going to break things up. As a movie on its own, without being part of the Star Wars catalogue, it was a great action film, and taken on its own merits, fine. But it didn't fit any of the Star Wars story. So then you come to this last film. I'm not going to give any spoilers. It does tie up the knots. It finishes the story. That was an awful lot for one film to have to do. And in where certain places you can see where they've had to cut a few corners to get all the story in. Okay? It's the best of the last three. I'll give it that. I'm not going to dispute that. It's the best of the last three. That isn't a very high bar to reach. Adam Driver must have been chuffed because at last Kylo Ren grows up and starts acting like somebody who's got some powers. Daisy Ridley was brilliant. I can see what they tried to do with Carrie Fisher, a great loss. I'm not sure that entirely worked. And I think the Force ghosts that we hoped to see didn't really materialise in the way that we hoped they would. That's not giving away anything because there's been Force ghosts before in Star Wars. So, it's the best of a bad bunch. It does end the story. I do end up thinking, okay, take me back to the time when the Sith were all powerful and the Jedi were all powerful. Let me see that story. Never mind this canon and people coming back from the dead. That in the first three films that was supposed to be a Sith power. No, it's supposed to be the ultimate Sith power that only one person, maybe two people possessed. Everyone's coming back from the dead now. If you're going to do a sci-fi film, that's fine. If you're going to do a trilogy, that's fine. You have one person do the story, do the thread, and that takes it right the way through, and it makes sense. Okay, spot on. Okay. If you're going to pick up someone else's story, at least follow the same rules. That's the criticism I've got of the last three films. Okay? George Lucas bent them a little bit, but as he invented them, that's fine. Okay? But throughout, if you think about it, from the early films when the Jedi had the Jedi Council and there was lots of Jedi and they could all use their lightsabers and they all had powers, and the Sith appeared and they all had powers, and that was the way you thought the Jedi should be. They were, you know, brilliant fight scenes, fantastic. The episodes 4, 5 and 6, all of a sudden, they're less powerful. And then you get to the last three, 7, 8 and 9. Suddenly you can do things that were against the rules in all the other films. Suddenly there's this First Order and there's no other great power in the universe. That's not the way empires end. So I'm still, as a Star Wars fan, I'm disappointed. But I'm pleased it's much, much, much better than 7 and 8. But please, guys, give us the story we want. Or create a whole new universe, create a whole new story, create a whole new sci-fi, and create your own rules. But if you're going to pick up someone else's story, at least follow the rules that are laid down in that story. You don't have spaceships in Game of Thrones. You don't have laser cannons in a cowboy and western, you know, in a western film. You don't have the Jedi in, I don't know, a gangster movie. But whatever you come up with, you follow a basic rule, a basic thread. This is what's possible, this is what's not possible. And then it's more believable. Even if what is supposed to be believable isn't possible, at least set some rules and stick to them. Don't make them up as you go along. And that is where I think the last three films have seriously deviated and seriously disappointed me. Go and see the film. It's the best of the last three. If only to say goodbye to some much-loved characters. But if you're a die-hard Star Wars fan, as I am, sorry. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click on like and subscribe. If you have some comments, feel free to comment below. I probably won't reply, I'll read them, but I don't want to get into an argument, I don't want to get into fights. That's just my opinion. I could be really wrong in your opinion, that's fine. I don't mind that. But I really don't want to that's just my opinion. It's not important. I'm nobody, okay? But thank you for watching, and please subscribe and like my channel, because there's all sorts of other stuff that you might be interested in as well. Thank you for watching.